I think that if you would have asked me as an American student in pretty much elementary, middle, high school, university, college, whether or not as an adult I would still care all that much about the American movement for independence, I think I probably would have told you that I had learned enough about the Battle of Concord, the Battle of Saratoga, Yorktown, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, because you literally relearn those same events. And what I've actually learned after a recent honeymoon trip to Washington, D.C., is that there's much more to the story than what you're taught in school. And I think that it's important, especially on the day that this episode goes out, that we learn the story behind things that I think for a large part our society takes for granted today. I want to talk about the Bill of Rights. Today's December 15th. The Bill of Rights were passed, or I should say ratified, on this day in 1792. And while it seems like it was probably pretty easy, all right, we ratified these things. All the states did it, of course. It's a lot of good things here, even though in today's society we would probably debate on some amendments to the Constitution. But there's a pretty significant backstory to why we have these why we have these amendments and we have this Bill of Rights. And I want to go to the very beginning with the Articles of Confederation. So, if you look at this, a lot of people I don't think understand that we as a nation tried to be a confederacy during the Revolutionary War and then after as well. So we had something called the Articles of Confederation. Essentially, we were, and this is very, very loose, we were a collection of separate states held together by a central government, a la the definition of a confederacy, right? The only issue was this was very inefficient. And it was inefficient because there wasn't a strong central government. You had different currencies, you had different foreign policies. No one wanted to pay off debts, no one wanted to help each other. And a group of people, and I think it is very important to say that a group of people, this wasn't the national movement in any means, felt that we needed a stronger central government, something that could move the nation forward. And if you pay attention to the end at this episode, I'm going to plug a book that I read. Actually, I bought in Washington, D.C. and read while I was there. But it takes a look at four different men that helped push for what the author calls the Second American Revolution. And another thing you have to realize is another reason that the Articles of Confederation weren't all that strong is because they would have these conventions pretty much yearly, and they would need a quorum, i.e., they would need 5 of the 13 states to send enough delegates to have what is called a quorum, meaning enough people are here, we can have a meeting. They were pretty much year on year not getting enough for a quorum, meaning your government isn't doing anything. It can't collect tax. It can't, have a foreign policy. None of that. And what these men decide is that they're going to push for a plan to not just amend the articles, but to totally try to create a new combining document, what we call today the Constitution. And it's largely led by a Virginian faction, James Madison being the primary, but James Madison can't do this by himself. He needs a strong person, a strong man that a lot of people know in the nation, that a lot of people look up to, and that's George Washington. And he has to convince George Washington to come out of retirement, which is very tough to do, especially considering after he had given up his command of the Continental Army at the end of the Revolution, he's very Cincinnatus. If you don't know the story of Cincinnatus, he's a Roman leader, and I'm not necessarily familiar with the story, but I kind of know the back. He's a Roman leader that gives up power and just retires to his home. And that's what Washington did. After the war, he leads the Society of Cincinnatus, which I think looking back on it and as I read a Washington biography, is pretty much just like an elitist society. It's a formation of the generals from the Continental Army that they just hang out, sort of stuff. But anyway, Washington is the name that Madison needs in order to get enough states to show up so that they can have a quorum. And as he kind of submits his plan, which is in history called the Virginia Plan, uh, Pennsylvania is going to also side with him. And the Virginia Plan wants a strong national government. And as I had said earlier, they want to go further than just amending. Because if you just amend the Articles of Confederation, you don't get the strong government that the Virginians want. So after many, many debates, it goes on for over a month. Eventually, the convention ends, and they push this constitution out to the states to ratify it. And it's actually pretty close. They don't know necessarily whether or not they're going to get enough votes to secure it. And Madison, along with Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay, post a bunch of anonymous, basically newsletter columns, looking to put in a positive light on this new constitution that they're proposing. So they're the Federalists. Eventually, I found this actually pretty interesting in reading the book, that since it was anonymous, it wasn't until after the Constitution was ratified that it came out who had written this stuff. And actually, the people there, they might have had a pretty strong idea of who would have been writing these articles, but it wasn't actually known at the time. And you also have another faction that's called the Anti-Federalists. These people don't want a strong national government, and they're not necessarily as well studied in history. I know I went to Barnes & Noble this last weekend, and there is like an anti-federalist papers, and that might just be a collection of anti-central government sort of papers. There wasn't necessarily a very strong faction. It was just a bunch of different people. And with these articles, it takes 2 full years to ratify this Constitution. And in these 2 years, and it's like basically the once a year meetings happen in these states for ratification. Few states pass it, another 6 months go by, another few states pass it, another few months go by, another few states, and eventually they do get enough states. They need 9 out of the 13 to ratify this Constitution in order for it to be passed into law. But all states request alterations to the Constitution, and this is where the Bill of Rights actually comes in. So they go ahead and they have their election for president and Congress, and then Madison introduces a series of amendments to the Constitution. And what he takes these amendments from is the state constitutions, and then the alterations requested from multiple states. So a lot of these amendments that you're going to see in the Bill of Rights, a majority of the states were like, hey, we want to make sure that the freedom of the press is protected. A number of states said, hey, we want to make sure that there is no central standing army. We want to make sure that the militia is the way that we are defended. You're kind of getting the point here. So originally, there is 20 amendments to this Constitution. And after 11 days of debate, it gets down to 17 and then down to 12. And now they have to go ahead, after they've all agreed. It doesn't matter if they all agree. The states, just as it is today, 75% of the states have to ratify this amendment to the Constitution in order for it to be passed into law. And it actually takes another 2 years before all the states have ratified. And I was actually interested to learn, as I looked into this tonight, that some of the articles weren't necessarily ratified. So you still have, I think, states as late as like 1993 ratifying some of these articles of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And if you look back on it, Rhode Island didn't even attend. One state said no. And I think that is something that when I introduced this short podcast sort of episode, I see a lot of connection between the founding and the Articles of Confederation and the Constitutional Convention and the ratification of the Bill of Rights and the amendments to the Constitution is kind of what a nation for us as a whole we're going through right now, where we don't really agree on anything. You know, you have your two sides, you have your anti-federalists and you have your federalists. And eventually it's going to come down to where you have to make a deal. And someday that'll probably happen here in the US. But that's the story of the Bill of Rights. I didn't want to go through all the rights because that creates controversy. Obviously, there's many amendments that to this day still cause issue. Freedom of press has come up. Obviously, the Second Amendment and gun rights comes up fairly often. But we're not going to touch on that. I just wanted to kind of show and tell the story very efficiently because I think sometime in the next year to 2 years, I'll probably sit down and actually do the full story of the American movement for independence, starting with the French and Indian War, even before that, and ending with really probably the end of George Washington's tenure as president. But I did want to take this time to plug the book that I read about the ratification for the Constitution. It's called The Quartet. The subtitle is Orchestrating the Second American Revolution, 1783 to 1789. It's by Joseph Ellis. It's actually like, even if you have a slight interest in wanting to understand what it took, we weren't originally a republic in the sense that a strong central government republic. What had to happen in order for us to get to this day, I didn't even know that. I took at least 10 classes. They skip the Articles of Confederation in every single class. Middle school, high school, your introductory college courses on the U.S. history. They just go, we have this short time period where the Articles, and then we become the government we have today. Well, what is the story behind that? And Joseph Ellis, Dr. Ellis, takes a look at the four men that he believes orchestrated that. If you're interested in checking out that book itself, there's a link to it in the Amazon, or there's an Amazon link down below. If you do decide to purchase the book through that link, a little bit of a kickback comes my way. You can also get it via Audible. I read it personally, and I should also point out that the book itself is 200 pages. So, I read it in basically 4 days, and that was like your plane travel and sitting in hotel rooms. Not sure how long the audiobook is, but I would highly recommend it. It was enough for me to go and purchase Ellis's other books on the American Revolution. So let me know what you guys think of this podcast sort of episode. It's going to be available down on iTunes if you want to download it there. Other than that, it'll just be a blank screen sort of thing here on the Interesting History YouTube channel. And stay tuned for some more content. We're going to be taking a deeper look at some of the characters of the American independence here shortly. So thank you guys very much for watching and listening, and I'll talk to you guys later.